Start it now. Assalamualaikum everyone. Thanks for joining our 14th Islamic course. There will be 10 sessions in total and it will be held from every Saturday 7 to 8:30 p.m. And if you join 7 out of the 10 session, you will be awarded a certificate. So today is our 9th session and it's on Jesus in Islam. It will be presented by Brother Omaru. Brother Omaru is a young, knowledge seeking and humble brother who is a Hong Kong U graduate and shows eagerness to help, especially the youth and the revert Muslims. So without further ado, please take it away.
Jazakallah khair, sister. To begin with, I'm not at all young anymore. Alhamdulillah. Bismillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi ashabihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can everyone hear me? Right?
Yes, can.
Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah. Okay. So to begin with, this is a topic oftentimes comes with a lot of heated discussion, right? Because especially when it comes to a theological or the crucifixion part of Jesus. But then what I want to focus on mostly today is not only the Islamic stance of it, but also actually how there are actually a lot of common terms that we can establish between our understanding of Jesus or Isa alayhi salam with that of Christian. Yeah, so I'll actually start off with a very important concept or article of faith of Islam, in fact, is that we are actually told to believe in all prophets. Like Allah mentioned in Surah Baqarah, say that we have faith in Allah and we have been revealed, and what has been revealed to us, what was revealed to Abraham, Ismail, Isaac, Jacob, and the tribes of Israel, and what was given to Moses and Jesus, and what was given to the prophets from there. We make no distinction between any of them, and we are Muslims. What does that mean? That means we as Muslims actually believe and need to believe in all these prophets. So what happens is, at times we'll come to find ourselves actually in the heated discussion on, or sometimes we'll even go about subconsciously rejecting or downgrading some of the other prophets, especially when it comes to some other faithful dialogue that we have with other religious belief. Like, for example, like it's also been recorded in a hadith, so in Sahih Bukhari, where Prophet Muhammad mentioned about where there's this occasion where there's this Bedouin who was arguing with a Jew. And so the Jew actually bring up the fact that, or the Bedouin who was a Muslim, who actually brought up the fact that Prophet Muhammad is better than Moses. And that's when Prophet Muhammad clarified that do not say I am better than Moses. Verily people will swoon on the day of judgment, and I will be the first to awaken, and behold, Moses will be holding the side of the throne. And something you need to notice is that, for example, in Islam, many of the prophetic description, all of them have their own unique relationship with Allah. Like, for example, Moses is the only prophet that has spoken directly to Allah without the intervention of Angel Gabriel or Angel Jibril, right? And for example, Ibrahim alayhi salam is described as the friend of Allah, right? And some other prophets are given different description and different status in Islam, right? So in essence, all these prophets, even though we know in general, Prophet Muhammad is the best of creation, and in fact, he will be the leader of mankind on the day of judgment. But we know all these different prophets have their own stance and unique position in the sight of Allah. And that's why, for example, Prophet Muhammad clarify or reestablish the fact that we are not meant to be seeing prophets over other prophets, right? This is very important because sometimes when we go into discussion with Christians and we come with usually the perspective that Prophet Muhammad is generally better than Isa alayhi salam, right? But in fact, Isa alayhi salam has his own place in Islam, where Prophet Muhammad despite him being the greatest of creation, will not be able to attain or accomplish. So to begin with, just to clarify that when we are trying to establish a common term with the understanding of Isa alayhi salam, we need to know that the entire purpose of the Quran or Prophet Muhammad is to actually confirm what was sent before. Like, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nazzala alayka al-kitaba bil haqq. He has certainly revealed to you, O Prophet, the book in truth. Musaddiqan lima bayna yadayhi, confirming what came before it. Wa anzala tawrati wal injil, confirming what came before it, and as it revealed the Torah and Gospel. And so the entire purpose of Quran is to not actually reject what was revealed in the Torah and the Gospel. Gospel usually translated, you can translate as Gospel or you can translate it as Bible. But essentially, we are not to reject whatever came before. And in fact, again, one of the article of faith we need to believe as Muslim is that the Torah and Gospel, including all previous revelations, are part of what Allah sent. And even though there may be some changes to them, but we are also meant to uphold them as well. To the extent where Prophet Muhammad, when he treated the Torah, he would actually put it on an elevated cushion, right? And so if Prophet Muhammad would give such dedication, such status to Torah at his time, then how much more so we should be as believers, right? And very important, there's a subtle difference between the two revealed that's highlighted in this ayah. Like when Allah mentioned about the truth that's sent, generally scholars consider that referring to the Quran, right? And it's used as nazala. So nazala is used when it comes to Quran, and anzala is used when it comes to the revelation of Torah and Gospel. This subtle difference actually symbolizes nazala actually comes with the idea that it is revealed in succession. So it's not revealed in one go. Like as we know, the entire Quran is actually sent throughout the entire 23 period of time, 23 years of time, right? And it's sent down in succession. Depending on the circumstances or situation, it is revealed at those circumstances and situation, and it's preserved ever since then, right? And anzala is actually revealed all in one go. And so that's why, for example, Gospels, sometimes in Greek, is called biblios. And biblios actually comes with the understanding as book. So that's why the entire Bible or the Old Testament is actually sent down in one go. Yeah, so this is subtly highlighted in this ayah. And why does that matter? It matters because when you think about it, if the Quran is sent down throughout a period, then it would be harder to change. Why? Because not only is it sent down over a period, but it is sent down in verbal language. And if you've noticed something about the Arabs at the time, so according to historians, like throughout the entire Mecca, there were only a dozens of them who know how to read and write. There are only a dozen of them who know how to read and write. What does that mean? That means many of which they would require memory to remember stuff, right? Because they don't know how to read and write, and the only way they could remember or preserve information is by remembering them. And a beautiful analogy, you can think of it like, for example, now in this day and age, when we are so used to our smartphones, so used to contacts being a click away, how many numbers do we actually remember? I remember back then when I was in school, I could easily, handfully remember 5 of my closest friends' number. Now, I think, yeah, now I could just remember my mom's number, right? And so that's why, for example, externalizing our memory actually causes us or causes our memory to fade easily. And so at the time, people were very good with their memory to the extent where they can actually remember the camel's lineage. Like they can remember the camel's lineage to the extent where they could remember where that camel, who's that camel's grandfather or great grandfather was. That is to what extent they were really good to their memory, right? And why does that matter? Is because once Prophet Muhammad mentioned or quote or recite an ayah, it's a word that he can never take them back, right? And especially when he was surrounded by the polytheists who was looking for every single opportunity to pin down his mistake, right? So every single ayah that he's recited is never taken back, right? And so that's why the Quran is able to be preserved as well, right? And become untainted because it is revealed verbally. But in comparison to Torah and Gospel, which was revealed in one go, they weren't meant to be preserved. They weren't meant to be preserved. So with time, they would be corrupted or altered or changed because it's a book that nobody has ever committed to memory. Or I should say, not much has committed it to memory, right? And so that's a subtle difference that's brought up here. And why does that matter is because despite the fact that it's been altered, something I find the most reassuring, especially when it comes to the discussion with fellow Christians. Sometimes I find whatever they quote, it depends on, of course, the content. I find it very reassuring to my own faith as a Muslim. Why? Because I find so many disturbingly similar content till today. For example, in the Bible, in Mark, one of the first commandment, and actually the second commandment as well, here, that says, for example, one of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another. And seeing that he answered them well, he asked him, which commandment is the first of all? And Jesus answered, the first is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. So essentially, the first commandment and the second commandment, which is considered the most important, is revolving around loving God, worshiping him, and also loving your neighbors, right? And in contrast, or actually in comparison, the Quran also speaks heavily about worshiping Allah because loving is in essence part of worship, right? And Allah mentioned in Surah Al-Imran, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ إِلَى بَعْضٍ. O people of the book, let us come to common terms, right? This is the common terms, right? We both do what? إِلَّا اللَّهَ وَلَا نُشْرِكْ بِهِ. That we worship none but Allah and associate none with him, right? And nor do we take any other lords instead of Allah, right? And why does that matter? Because when you talk about worship, and when you talk about worship with other people who claims to have or carry no religious belief, that is when you find talking to Christians a lot more easier. That we have this common ground, that we understand that if there is really a Lord, then he is meant to be worshipped. Because when you talk about religion with non-Muslims or non-Christians, they have no problem accepting there is a creator. Many of them I've talked to, especially when I was in school days, even when I'm working in my workplace, when it comes to the discussion of God, religion, right? They have no problem accepting there's a God, there is a creator, right? But what differs is whether they are able to accept the worshiping of God, right? And they have no problem saying there is a God, but then they have problem accepting to worship him, right? For example, praying 5 times a day, it's difficult. To be honest, it is difficult. Fasting Ramadan, wearing hijab, they are all difficult acts of worship. And so that's why it's a hindrance. And sometimes to them, they see it as hindrance because they aren't able to give up part of what they are used to, right? And they are not able to take that step to worship or to dedicate their lives to God in worship to him, because it's just so much more difficult to establish this concept of worshiping God. And that is something I have no problem establishing with fellow Christians, right? And so Allah continue, شيئا ولا يتخذ بعضنا بعضا أربابا من دون الله فإن تولوا فكل أشهد بأننا مسلمون. But if they turn away, then say, bear witness that we have certainly submitted to Allah alone, right? And so this is one of the strongest common terms that we can establish with Christians and with other fellow Christians who claim to follow Christ, right? Or who claim to follow Jesus. And another concept, for example, love thy neighbor or love your neighbor, right? And in a collection of ahadith, there are so many hadith where Rasulullah emphasized this concept, where Prophet mentioned about none of you truly have faith until he loves for people what he loves for himself, and until he loves a person for no reason other than Allah. And Prophet Muhammad mentioned that also, let him treat people the way he would love to be treated. And another narration, love for people what you love for yourself, and you will be a believer. Behave well with whoever would be your neighbor, and you will be a Muslim. So the concept of Muslim is tied closely to loving others as well, right? And so all these similarities comes to show that there is still a lot of common grounds that we can establish with the teaching that is still within the Bible and the Torah, right? And of course, in general, as Muslims, the position that we would take when it comes to understanding the verses from the previous revelation is through the lens of Quran and Sunnah. Because Quran, again, we are here to confirm what was revealed. And so whatever or whether something is right or wrong depends heavily on what the Quran says, right? So the Quran becomes a furqan in which we would use to distinguish between what is right and what is wrong. Yeah, and so another verse, for example, in Matthew actually quotes that Jesus once told his disciples, then the king will say to those at his right hand, Come, you are that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. And I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Right? The king here actually refers to God, right? And the disciple or a righteous man then will answer him, Lord, when was it that you saw me, that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty that we gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And that's when the king will answer them, truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. So what does that mean? That means however we treat people, the people we fed, people who we gave drink to, or give drinks to, clothed, or visited when they're sick, are basically acts of worship done to God, right? And a very, very similar narration is again collected in a narration. And actually in this Sahih Muslim, Prophet Muhammad mentioned that verily Allah will say on the day of judgment, O son of Adam, I was sick, but you did not visit me. And he will say, my Lord, how can I visit you when you are the Lord of the worlds? Then that's when Allah said, did you not know that my servant was sick and you did not visit him? And had you visited him, you would have found me with him. And it doesn't end there. O son of Adam, I asked you for food, but you did not feed me. Right? And he will say, my Lord, how can I feed you when you are the Lord of the worlds? Did you not know that my servant asked you for food, but you did not feed him? And had you fed him, would have found me with him? And again, continue, O son of Adam, I asked you for drink, but you did not provide me. My Lord, how can I give you drink when you are the Lord of the worlds? And that's when Allah mentioned that the servant asked you for drink, but you did not provide for him. And had you have given him, you would have found me with him. So all these again show very, very close similarities between what's being revealed and what the Quran and Sunnah came to confirm as well. So now all this is to establish one important concept, is that, again, as we've said, is to establish the concept that we are here to confirm what is revealed, and all the while that we have so many common terms, sometimes even more than what we differ when it comes to the discussion with Christians or with, again, people who claim to follow Jesus. Yeah. But before I start talking about the story of Jesus or the very mission and purpose of Jesus, I want to establish who or where was Jesus sent to, right? At where era, so that you can contextualize and better appreciate the role of Isa alayhi salam, or Jesus, at his, or when he is in his society, when he was sent. So at the time, in Jerusalem, Romans were occupying the capital of Jerusalem and the area around the temple. So Herod the Great is actually the king who was under the rule of Romans. And what happened is, as many kings would do or would be, is that they will massacre anyone who comes to threaten their kingdom. And I wanted to appreciate that many of these stories about the past or histories, they don't exactly repeat each other. And sometimes we can even draw parallels with our current situation, with our current day and age occurrence. Like we can also see that many regimes across different countries may establish or may show some of these traits, right? And so we can somehow relate to the situation better, right? So for example, not only will he kill anyone who would get into the way or who would threaten his kingdom. He would even go about destroying temples, which was established all the way by Prophet Dawud alayhi salam, right? Not only that, he would actually introduce idols to the community to turn Jerusalem into a tourist spot. Does this sound very similar to the polytheist who was in Mecca, who first came about to introduce idols in Kaaba when Ibrahim alayhi salam built the Kaaba, right? So all these, again, some to show that with the passage of time, with the corruption of people, it's somewhat of an inevitable downturn of the society. And not only is this king corrupted, many of the teachers or scholars of Judaism would also conform to these power as well. So what happens, many of the teachers of Judaism were highly influenced by power and politics. And so zealots, who are basically a group of activists who would incite people to rage or to overturn the government, right? And again, who's the government? He was Harold. And he would make sure that everybody who would ever try to turn down his kingdom is being massacred or is being get rid of, right? So all these would cause a lot of bloodshed and would cause a lot of life. And not only that, it doesn't end there. So many of the custodians of the law were fraudulent and unethical. So they would establish law in their favor. And not only that, they would also be cheating pilgrims who were coming to worship at the temple. And all these is impaled to the very last point, which is the disobedience to parents, right? So what happened is one of the classical scholar by the name of Ibn Qayyim, rahimahullah, he actually mentioned about one of the most severe downturn of the society starts with disobedience to parents. Why? Because as we know, and actually in the next class, Brother Salim will actually cover a little more about the signs of the Day of Judgment. One of the many signs of the Day of Judgment is that a mother will give birth to his master. What does that mean? That means this mother will give birth to his son or daughter, whom she will be in servitude to. So technically speaking, like as many mothers would be in servitude to their child, but this narration means that their child will be so disobedient that they are as though the master of their own parents, right? So that's why, for example, the ultimate downturn of a society would end when disobedience to parents become rampant and common. Yeah, and all these establish the fact that how dark the society was when Isa alayhi salam was sent to. And remember, like these are Jews which were liberated, freed, and given prophets after prophets after prophets to guide them through their journey after Musa alayhi salam or Moses have saved them from the oppression of Pharaoh. So under all these oppression, the Jews were expecting and were anticipating the coming of Messiah. The coming of Messiah. Right? And later I will elaborate on the concept of Messiah, but in general, is in essence, the Jews knew that there will be a Messiah who will actually free them from all this oppression and to give them the kingdom that they wanted, which is the freedom from being under control of the Romans, right? And that's why, for example, when Jesus explained himself in his mission, though, it is quite the contrary to what the Jews at the time expect. So the Jews was expecting liberation from the oppression and liberation, or to establish the temple again, right? But Isa alayhi salam, or Jesus, actually clarified his very mission. So what happens is in Luke, in the Bible, Luke, chapter Luke, once Jesus was asked by the pharisees when the kingdom of God was coming, and he answered, the kingdom of God is not coming with things that can be observed, nor will they say, look, here it is, or there it is. For in fact, the kingdom of God is within you. So what happens is, Musa alayhi salam came with rules and regulations, because Musa alayhi salam freed the Jews from the oppression of Pharaoh. And so they need to establish some new rules at the time. So many of the ruling in the Old Testament focuses on the halal and haram and the do's and don'ts, or the external aspect of worship, right? And Isa alayhi salam, his job is to actually to reaffirm or to reestablish these rulings instead of coming up with new ones. Right? And this again, in contrary to what generally Christians believe, that Isa salam, or Jesus, is not to come with a new theological understanding of God, but in fact, it is just to reconfirm, reaffirm, and reestablish what Moses and the series of prophets came to establish at the time. Yeah. And so this comes next is the very definition of Messiah. So the Jews were waiting for Messiah. But what exactly is Messiah? What exactly does Messiah mean? So it actually means, or it comes with the term to wipe, or the anointed one. What does anointed mean? So it means somewhat like appointment, but it's basically in as a successor to a previous role. This further confirmed the idea that Messiah, or Jesus, is not to establish new rule, but is to re-establish what were the rules that were given by previous prophets, which is the Old Testament. So that's with the background of Isa alayhi salam, when he was sent, and his role as a prophet. Now, before I talk about the ultimate purpose and the mission of Isa alayhi salam, I want to establish also where Isa alayhi salam came from as a family. What was his lineage? Allah mentioned in the Quran that indeed Allah chose Adam, Noah, the family of Abraham, and the family of Imran above all people of their time. And I want to appreciate the fact that all these, Adam, Noah, Abraham, were prophets. But according to general mufassirs, or the understanding of the scholars, Imran is actually not considered a prophet. Imran is actually not considered a prophet. He is considered a righteous Jew who was very practicing at his time, right? And why does that matter? Because despite not being a prophet, there will be a prophet that comes after him, right? And that's why the ayah follow up by it will mention about, for example, they are all descendants of one another, and Allah is knowing, or Allah is all hearing and all knowing. All hearing and all knowing. What does that mean? Because essentially, Allah. So this is like a preview to what the next ayah will speak about, right? So Allah has mentioned about He knows and He hears. Why? Because essentially why Imran, as an ordinary worshiper, not prophet, will came through him a prophet is because of the wife of Imran, who in historical account is called Hanan, made a prayer or made a dua where he or her wife or his wife mentioned about, remember when the wife of Imran said, my Lord, I dedicated what is in my womb entirely to your service. So accept it from me, and you alone are truly all hearing and all knowing. And the previous ayah just mentioned about how Allah is all hearing of all dua, and He's all knowing of what dua to give us. Right? And that's when she delivered and she said, my Lord, I have given birth to a girl. And Allah fully knew. Why? Because Allah was all knowing the whole time. And Allah fully knew what she had delivered, and the male is not like the female, right? And they, like Hanan, recognize or acknowledge that the fact that giving birth to a male is different from giving birth to a female, because at the time she wanted to dedicate her womb towards the service, towards the worship of Allah, right? And to better do so, because many of the priests or clergy were male, and to better do so, usually it would mean it would be a male who would be in a better position or in a better place to do so instead of a female, right? But little did she know that Allah, being all-knowing, knew what would came or what will come after this female child that she has given birth to. And she is named Mary or Maryam alayhi salam. And I seek your protection for her and her offspring from Shaitan, the accursed. Right? So all these comes to show that Mary actually came from a lineage of righteous descendants. Righteous descendants. Why does that matter? Is because when she actually is actually giving birth to Isa alayhi salam afterward, she is very concerned to her chastity or to her status in the society. And later we'll explain why. But before that, I want to focus on, for example, how or what is the status of Mary in Islam. So the story of Mary in Islam is not a background to the story of Jesus. It is actually the essence, or it's one of the most important story plot of Jesus' story. Why? Because of all chapters in the Quran, there are not a single chapter that Jesus is mentioned, or that Jesus is named after. But then there's a surah in the Quran that Mary is named after. And not only that, during her time, like she's held to such respectable position as a young woman that people in the community will actually cast lots to be her guardian, or to provide for her while she is secluding herself in her worship. And while she was secluding herself in worship, occasionally Zachariah will see out of season fruit at her secluded prayer place. And that is that at the time was very difficult to achieve. Why? Because if you think about it, in these days and age, it is very easy, especially with globalization, it is so easy to get fruits all over the world, and it's so easy to get out of season fruit because of a lot of technology involved that could preserve fruits or that could allow fruits to grow in out of season times, right? But at the time, it would be very difficult to find out of season fruits or vegetation that would be served to people. But every time when Zachariah visits Maryam alayhi salam, whom Zachariah was part of the caretaker of Maryam alayhi salam, he would actually see all of these out of season fruit. And it's because of that, Maryam alayhi salam actually taught Zachariah a very important lesson, that when Zachariah asked of the fruits, Maryam alayhi salam actually told him that it is ultimately Allah who provides. And that's when Zachariah actually saw the hope of light, that he could be making dua for a son, right? And that's when Yahya or John, that is followed or as a descendant of Zachariah, right? And not only that, she is one of the 4 women who have been said by Prophet Muhammad to have perfected faith, right? And some scholars even go about arguing that she may even be a prophet, on the condition that if prophet is able to talk to angels, then she is one of them, right? And this is debatable, but the fact that scholars have such a conclusion comes to show her status in Islam. And so what happened is, when Mary was given the news of a son, remember when the angels proclaim, "Oh Mary, that Allah gives you good news of a word from him. His name will be Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, honored in this world and the hereafter. And he will be the nearest to Allah. And he will speak to people in his infancy and adulthood and will be one of those righteous." So this is a preview to what is to come, right? So this is a news that through angel that Allah is giving Maryam alayhi salam. And so what happened is, while Mary or Maryam alayhi salam is secluded in his or in her own worship, she was visited by a young, handsome looking person. And she was taken aback because at her personal worship spot or place, she is not often visited by strangers. And so immediately she asked that person to fear Allah, right? And that's when the person revealed that he is actually Gabriel, angel Gabriel, in the form of a man who came to give the news of Jesus as a child. So as she conceives and as she bore through those months of pregnancy till she reached a point of childbirth, the pain of childbirth actually drove her to the trunk of the palm tree. And she said, "Would that I had died before that or before this and be a thing forgotten." And this is very important. Like, she is not actually seeking for death because of solely the pain that she's going through. Because if she is seeking for death, then she won't be asking to be forgotten. And why would she be asking to be forgotten is because, as I've mentioned, her status in the society will never accept her to be unmarried and to come back to town with a child. And so at the moment, she felt like she's as though not going to make it through. And imagine dying in a state where, or being in a state where she is holding a child, which people will definitely slander her chastity, right? Will definitely slander her chastity, to the extent where the scholar, when they explain about this ayah, they mention about how people during her childbirth were already naming people who would have committed adultery with her, right? And so people were already questioning Mary's chastity at the time, even before childbirth. So what more so when she comes back to the town with a child? That's why she wants to be forgotten, because now it's not about herself, but it's about the honor of Islam and the honor that Islam gave her as well. And that's when the angel called from below her, "Do not be sad, for your Lord has provided a stream beneath you. And so shake the trunk of the palm tree towards you, and ripe dates will fall upon you. Eat and drink and be comforted." Right? And so angels were sent to inform her that her little movement, because how strong can it, because I'm not sure, have any of you seen a date palm tree, like a full-grown date palm tree? And it's usually very sturdy, and even a full-grown adult, to be able to move that tree for dates to fall down will be a very difficult task to complete. But Mary, during her labor as a woman, is even more difficult to exert that force or enough amount of force to shake up that tree to have dates that fall down. But this comes to show that Allah, in his ultimate wisdom, would always want us in turn to put in the little effort that we have to receive the blessed result that he gives. Right? And so despite the fact that she won't be able to exert much of a force, like Moses, when he tabbed the shaft to split the Red Sea, his little force won't be able or will never be strong enough to clear up the entire sea. But Allah is just coming to show us as believer in turn that we need to put in that little effort in order to receive the great blessing that comes with it, right? And the story doesn't end there. So what happened is, that's when she brought her new cradle to her people, carrying him, and they said, "Oh Mary, you have done something unheard of. O sister of Aaron, your father was not an evil man." Remember, she came from a lineage of righteous worshiper, nor was your mother unchaste, right? And so she was being questioned completely by the people of her town. And that's when she pointed to him, which is Jesus, and they said, how can we speak to a baby in the cradle? And something I've been questioning as well, like, why would Allah, with his ultimate wisdom, would not allow Mary in this trying time to defend herself? Like, Mary is actually not allowed to speak for 3 days. And she's actually not allowed to speak when she goes back to town, right? And so that leaves me a question: why would Allah want her to not speak when she should be speaking for herself, to defend her chastity, to explain all that must have happened? But when you think about it, if a woman, think about it logically, if a woman were to come back with a child, it's hard to convince anybody that nothing, or as a woman who was single and married to come with a child, to convince people that she isn't unchaste is beyond acceptable, or it's beyond logical, right? And so one of the ultimate wisdom that I see that Allah has placed is that now Mary, as a young woman, unmarried young woman, will need not defend herself. Why? because Allah will make the first cradle to speak on behalf of her, right? And in Islam, actually, there are three instances, three situations where a cradle spoke. And this is one of those first instances. And what's so interesting about those three instances that a cradle spoke is that they were all during or for the purpose of clarifying one's chastity. Like, for example, there is a narration in Sahih Bukhari, narrated by Abu Hurairah, where he mentioned about Rasulullah mentioned about how during the time of Bani Israel, there's this woman who was nursing her child. And when this woman actually saw a handsome rider who was well-dressed, who was honorable, who was noble, appeared so at least, and she actually made dua at the time that her child to be like him, to be someone like him, right? And that's when the cradle actually stopped nursing and actually go about making another dua to not be like him, right? And a few moments later, there's this woman, actually a slave girl, who has been slandered, who has been called to be unchaste, and also is downtrodden or seen as less in a society, right? And her mother, who was still nursing the same child, go about making dua to not make his son like her, right? To not go through, or to not be like her, right? And that's when the cradle again spoke that to make, and he actually made dua to be like her, right? And the mother was very confused, and she asked, why would you make dua to be someone who is less privileged compared to the one who was more, right? And that's when the child go about explaining that she, despite the fact that she's been called unchaste or called an adulteress, but she is actually chaste, and she is actually upon the deen, upon Islam, upon being a Muslim, right? And whereas the man who was seen wealthy, well-dressed, is actually upon kufr. And so that's why he actually spoke to clarify this point, right? And to clarify the chastity of that woman as well, right? And another story is when, also another story in Bani Israel. So there's this worshiper called Juraj, and so he was a worshiper of Allah. So he would worship Allah day and night. So much so that one occasion, her mother actually called him to help, right? But Juraj actually mentioned about he's too busy in his worship to help his mom, right? And that's when his mom actually make dua against Juraj, that he is not to die before meeting an adulteress, right? Her mother actually made dua for him to meet an adulteress before he died, right? And so that's when, for example, Juraj was once knocked on the door and visited by an adulteress who was holding a child whom the adulteress claimed to be of his, right? And that's when the third scenario, or the third circumstance, where a cradle spoke. That's when the cradle actually spoke and clarified that this man is not the father of the child, right? And all these three instances are there where a cradle spoke to clarify or to clear the name of someone who has been slandered. And the first of all those stories is Isa alayhi salam. clarifying for her mother that she is not amongst those unchaste, right? And what did Isa alayhi salam then say? Actually, he mentioned about Qala inni Abdullah. Jesus actually declared when he was a cradle, I am truly a servant of Allah. Again, this clarified his position or his status in the sight of the people, where he is not the Son of God, nor is he the God, but he is actually a servant of God, right? And he continues, Ataniya kitaba waja'alna nabiyya. And he has destined me to be given the scripture and to be a prophet. Right? Imagine all these Jews who were surrounding Mary, who was accusing her of it, are hearing all these. So actually, despite the fact that in the Christian's perspective, they don't really accept that Jesus spoke as a cradle. But imagine if people at their time, the Jews, were to witness a speaking cradle who was exactly the Messiah that they have expected, how much more so should they believe in it? Right? Imagine witnessing all these miracles right before their eyes. Right? And Isa alayhi salam doesn't stop there. And he mentioned about وَجَعَلْنَا لِي مُبَارَكًا أَيْنَمَا كُنْتَ. And he has made me blessed wherever I go. So what happened is, so Isa alayhi salam, in perspective, he was expected to re-establish the kingdom of Dawud alayhi salam, or David, right? And so imagine, that will usually come with a lot of resources. So generally there are two types of prophets. Some prophets which were a lot more resourceful, who owns kingdom, who were able to establish temples, who were able to establish a kingdom around or upon Islam, right? And there's another group of prophets which were less resourceful, but then they were just able to achieve the same as well, right? And that is the power of blessing, right? And Isa alayhi salam is blessed wherever he may be, right? وَأَوْصَانَنِي بِالصَّلَاةِ وَالزَّكَاةِ. And he was sent to re-establish prayer and zakah, right? And when it comes to prayer and zakah, it's oftentimes a combinations we will come across very often in the Quran. So scholars actually mention about how salah is rooted with the word silsila, which is actually our connection with God, and zakah is actually our connection with the people. So essentially, Isa alayhi salam is sent to establish people's connection with God through prayer and people's connection with other people through zakah, right? As long as he lived, ma dumtu hayya, right? As long as I live. And he doesn't end there. وَبَرَّ وَالِدَاتِي وَلَمْ يَجْعَلْنِي جَبَّارًا شَقِيًّا. And to be kind to my mother, and he has not made me arrogant or defiant. And when it comes to biru walidain or barra, like the first word here, bar, or it's often translated as to be kind, to be righteous to my mother, or righteous to parents, but actually it comes with a much more deeper connotation from the Arabic language. So barra actually comes from, or bir actually comes from the root word of bar. So usually Arabs would use bar to explain large, vast land that is so vast, that is so large, that it doesn't come with any end in sight, right? What does that mean? That means to achieve or to attain or to reach a state of bar or bir actually means coming out as really big-hearted, that, for example, the land, as massive as it is, a cut on a little corner won't disturb you to the least. Like, for example, if you have a massive land, having given out a portion or a small corner of it won't really be noticeable to you or won't be bothering to you. And so the concept of bir or baru is actually in the sense that you are so big-hearted or you are so content with what you have that giving away part of it won't really affect you the least, or won't really affect you the least, right? So that means you're willing to give despite the fact that we all have a limited land to give, right? And so barra, or to be big in heart, is actually a concept in English as well. So that's the concept that Isa alayhi salam is sent to establish. And remember, again, one of the traits of the Bani Israel is that they are a group of people who have been, or who was at the time, very disobedient to parents, right? And so Isa alayhi salam is sent to re-establish being bir, or being righteous, or being big-hearted to one's parents. And not only that, wasalam alayya yawmun walid, right? And peace be upon me the day I was born, wa yawma amut, the day I will die, wa yawma ab'athu hayya, and the day that I will be raised back to life, right? And so to achieve true peace is only through Isa alayhi salam at the time, because falling prophets is the way to go about achieving salvation, and salvation means achieving peace, right? And this is basically highlighted in this conversation in the end, that all these Jews that were surrounding, witnessing a talking cradle who was so articulate, who knew their language, who was at the age that he wasn't supposed to talk, mentioning all these, right? And how much of a sign would that be to the Jews at the time? And these are not only the miracles that Isa alayhi salam came to establish or came to show. There are other miracles where Isa alayhi salam showed. So Allah mentioned about Allah teach Isa alayhi salam writing and wisdom, Torah and the gospel, and make him a messenger of the children of Israel to proclaim, right? And so at the time, Isa alayhi salam, at his very young age, he was already very prolific with the Old Testament, with the Torah, right? And to the extent where other scholars feel their position threatened, right? So he was so knowledgeable of the Torah that classical scholars, remember that they were scholars possibly affected by the regime already. They were already subjected to power, or being altered, or being changed by the power at their time, right? And Isa alayhi salam, being so well-versed and so upright of his ruling, is basically correcting them, right? And not only that, and he was mentioned also, I have come to you with a sign from your Lord, that I will make for you a bird from clay, breathe into it, and it will become a real bird by Allah's will. So one of the signs that Isa alayhi salam came with is to be able to give life to the death, right? And the sequence of occurrence of these, or the sequence of mentioning and occurrence of these miracles is very important. So first, Isa alayhi salam gave life to the death, which was just basically clay. And he was given the ability to heal the blind and the leper. So this is healing the living and raise the death to life by Allah's will. That means his third miracle that he demonstrates is that he's able to raise the death to life. So he was able to give life to the non-living. He was able to heal the living, and he's able to resurrect or give life to the one who passed away, right? And not only that, he was also said to carry the sign that he will be able to know what is hidden in their houses, not only in their houses, but also in their hearts as well. So he's able to prophesize what they eat and what they store in their houses. And so all these are signs where Isa alayhi salam was sent with. All these are signs that Prophet Jesus was sent with. And so next thing is, with all these signs, then it's hard to be able to deny the very role of prophet of Isa alayhi salam. But there comes a risk where with all these signs or miracles that Isa alayhi salam was to show, people may claim divinity to his position, right? And this is where Islam comes really clear to terms with, where, for example, in Surah Al-Ikhlas, chapter 112, Allah mentioned very clearly that he himself is one. Say, O Prophet, he's Allah, he's one. And he, as Allah, does not need any sustainer. But yet, he, as the sustainer, is needed by all. He, as the sustainer, is needed by all. And that's when he come to clarify that he, as Allah, never need to have an offspring, nor was he born to anything. Because if he is free of need, and that means in logic, he is also free from having or being given birth to any offspring or any other object, right? And from there, he is non-comparable to anything that people had ever associated him with. So in terms of the divinity of Isa, Islam has a really clear position that he is not God, nor is he son of God, because it's not befitting for any God to need to reproduce, nor should they be a product of someone reproducing. And also another ayah which clarified that Allah mentioned that that is Jesus, the son of Mary, a word of truth, which they doubt. It is not for Allah to take a son, glory be to him. When he decrees a matter, he only says it is. He only says to it, be, and it is. Right? So some may argue Jesus going through a miraculous birth where he doesn't have a mother or he doesn't have a father is in and of itself a miracle, or in and of itself support the fact that he has some divinity to it, right? But in contrast, the Quran actually go about arguing that Adam alayhi salam, or Adam, peace be upon him, as a prophet, came with no father and no mother, right? And if Isa or Jesus comes with no father, is in itself an evidence to support his divinity, then how about Adam, who came with no father and mother? Yeah. And so this is the evidence that if you ponder upon and if you think logically, it won't make sense, right? And another clarification that we as Muslims need to put forth is the very crucifixion of Jesus. So what happened is, our understanding is that Isa alayhi salam was never crucified, nor was he killed. And this is clarified in Surah Al-Nisa, where Allah mentioned in the Quran, and for boasting, we killed the Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, the messenger of Allah. But they neither killed nor crucified him. He was only made to appear so. So this is where many scholars differ as to how or what does it mean to be appeared so. But the position that most scholars adopt is that one of the companions of Jesus who betrayed him was made to look like Jesus, right? And he was made to look like Jesus. So at the time, imagine, Jesus was there to reestablish the temple and to reestablish the Torah, the rulings of the Torah. And so that would inevitably agitate Herod, who was there to massacre anyone that would threaten his kingdom, right? And so at the time, he sent in Roman army to capture and to crucify Jesus, right? And there's this companion who had facilitated that to happen by giving in information about Jesus, right? And so Allah, as a punishment for him, turned him into looking alike Jesus, and so they have captured him instead. And so the person who was crucified is the companion of Jesus, but not Jesus himself, right? And all these are part of the story that we can't really verify. But one thing for sure, the Quran made it clear that Isa or Jesus was never killed. And so that's why the ayah continue. For example, even those who argue for this crucifixion are in doubt. They have no knowledge whatsoever, only making assumptions. They certainly did not kill him. Like Allah reconfirm or reaffirm this idea that all these that they have been claiming, or whatever versions of the story that we've been hearing, are nothing but assumptions, right? And most certainly they have not killed him. And rather Allah will raise him up to himself. And most certainly, why? Because Allah is Al-Aziz, Almighty, and Al-Hakim, and all-wise. He is both able to, and he knows the wisdom behind. And another ayah, where remember when Allah mentioned about, oh Jesus, I'll take you and raise you up to myself. I will deliver you from those who disbelieve and elevate your followers above the disbelievers until the day of judgment. Then to me, you will all return and I will settle all your disputes. So all these again clarify that Isa alayhi salam, till this day, is alive and with Allah, right? And how so? We won't question, because this is where our limited faculty will fail us miserably, right? Because we as with a limited faculty is trying to imagine or visualize the unlimited power of Allah, right? And so that's why, for example, with verses like these, where it comes to a certain miracle or some miraculous happening, we should take it as is, right? Without further associating any methodology for it to happen so. Right? That's the position where Muslims generally take. And what exactly will Isa then come to establish while he is waiting for his second coming? So in his second coming, it's actually one of the signs of the last day, or one of the signs of the day of judgment. So what will he come to do is also reestablishing the ruling of the prophet that is before him. So Messiah is there to establish the kingdom or reestablish the temple, right? And so at the time when he was born, he was to reestablish Torah. And in his second coming, he is to reestablish the teaching of Islam, the teaching of Quran, right? And so in Sahih Muslim, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, mentioned about, by Allah, the son of Mary will descend as a just ruler. So he will actually judge across or judge between the people, right? And not only that, he will abolish the cross because it is the cross that symbolizes him having divinity, right? And he will kill the swine and annul the tribute. And he will leave the she-camel such that no one collects from it. And he will cause reckon, hatred, and envy to disappear. And he will call people to give their wealth in charity, but no one will need it. So what happens is Isa al-Islam, as a just ruler, is able to establish the kingdom again. And what happened is there will be no corruption, there will be no hatred and no envy, to the extent where people are all in such a good affluent state that the money people have nowhere to go as charity. Right? These actually symbolizes near the very end of time, and which again, in the next class, Brother Salim will go through in detail. Right? And so that's his purpose for his second coming, to again continue what he left off in his first coming by establishing the kingdom of Islam. And with that, I'm open to receive questions.
Jazakallah khairan, Brother Omaru.
Do you have any questions?
So it's time for Q&A. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes. You can use the chat box or open your mic to ask any questions you have.
You can use the audio, like Anissa mentioned, or you can use the chat box. We have 10 minutes for Q&A. Otherwise, Brother Omaru may ask you guys some questions. We'll reverse the roles to test. Oh, okay. I think there is a question. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. I study in a Christian school, and sometimes we have to study the Bible and pray. although I try to avoid it as much as possible, there are certain situations like exams where it is compulsory. Is it okay? So Sister Aisha is asking.
Mm,
Maybe she's asking on behalf of someone else, or maybe she's experiencing this herself as well. Yeah, it could be
mm.
one of the two scenarios. Thank you, Sister Aisha. Good question.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good question. And given the demographic in Hong Kong, I believe many of the students actually come from or is currently studying in Christian school. And I'd say again, like boils back down to the concept where when it comes to worship, that is where you want to refrain as much as you possibly can, right? And if it means voicing out to authority or having parents involved, I'd say this is part of the freedom that we do own in Hong Kong, where technically speaking, when it comes to religious practice, alhamdulillah, as far as I know, as long as you express it respectfully and to authority, technically speaking, they won't have an issue of you not participating in their acts of worship. Now, when it comes to those exams or study, this is where I don't think, well, of course, if you can avoid, but I don't think it's actually possible because it's part of the curriculum and it's part of your studies. But what you can do though, is that, again, I do find a lot of similarities, a lot of concepts that is still remaining in Christianity that we as Muslims can still take benefit from. But the main defining factor is whether it contradicts the very teaching of Islam, right? And I'd say when it comes to exams, sometimes not all informations are necessarily true, but it won't, what do you call that? It by default or by ruling won't really be haram for you to take part in them. Like from a Sharia perspective, you get what I mean. From a Sharia perspective, since we don't really have a choice, and plus it's part of curriculum, and so I'd say you can still take part in it, but then you can make the experience more fruitful by making sure that you are able to verify or you are able to cross check them with what is from the Quran and Sunnah. Yeah, and you'll actually come to realize there are actually there are actually plenty surprising connections that may even go about boosting your iman as well. Yeah. So what is out of our control, what is out of our circumstances, we can do our best to make the experience a lot more beneficial by doing so, inshallah. Yeah.
Jazakallah khairan, Brother Omaru. And yep, Aisha has also said Jazakallah khair. Sister Junaida Wong is saying Assalamu alaikum. It's been a very interesting lesson. Thank you very much. So a compliment right there. Brother Omaru, I have a question for you if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Some people, or perhaps I've encountered this question from Christians, they use the line of logic that since Jesus doesn't have a father, therefore he is different from normal human beings. And given that it's impossible for someone to not have a father, therefore Jesus is beyond a human being. He is actually God. So how would you refute this argument?
Mm. Mm, yeah, as I put it, like the Quran actually did put forth uh, a discussion or an argument against this very claim. So if Jesus was born without a fatherly figure, then how much so for Adam, who was born without, or who was sent, or who existed without both a father and a motherly figure? How much more so would he have divinity if that's the claim, logically speaking, right? And so this, again, kind of contradict the very um, essence of their own faith, to be honest. And I'd say, like back then when I was in university, I do have a lot of encounter talking to Christians, and especially for Christians who would actually make it a point to visit the prayer room in university and make it a point to attend Muslim events just to meet more Muslims and to give dawah to them, right? And so I'd say when it comes to these discussions, I'd say it helped me a lot. Again, I find many of these discussions very reaffirming to my own faith. And but at the same time, they are approaching with a mindset to not understand your faith, but to spread theirs. And so I'd say you need to be very cautious as to whether these are discussions you want to, you want to make too much with. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Jazakallah khairan, Brother Maru. Indeed, the Quran mentions Inna masala Isa indallahi kamasali Adam. The similitude, the example of Jesus in the sight of Allah is the example of Adam. So, as you rightly pointed out, Adam is without a father. The first man created, the first person created. He doesn't have a father. He doesn't have a mother. So wouldn't that make him a greater God when compared to Jesus? So if someone deserves worship when it comes to human, then it should be him. But of course, we do not worship the creation. We worship the creator who created. So subhanallah, thank you very much for that. Any other quick questions? I understand time is almost up. So for those who have any questions, we could only entertain one more question. We'll wait just 20 seconds for that. Okay, I'll give it back to you, Anisa. Anisa? I think we couldn't hear Anisa. Yeah, we couldn't hear, no worries. Because of some technical issues Anisa has been facing. But you can see her she has typed that the next session will be on, yes, the last and final session will be on 17th December. Will be on, as Brother Omaru has mentioned, the topic on the signs of the last day to be presented by Professor Salim Ben Said. And we will also have the graduation ceremony, after which, so just to let everyone know, the session will be from 7 o'clock to 8 o'clock. And then from 8 o'clock to 8:30, it will be the graduation ceremony. Okay, so it wouldn't be an additional half an hour. It's going to be from the same time, the usual time, 7 p.m. to 8:30. It's just that the session itself will just be 1 hour and followed by half an hour of graduation ceremony. Okay, now the attendance, we've been taking attendance for every single session. Maybe during this week, we may contact a few of you just to reassure that you were present. We have taken some snapshots of the attendance list in Zoom. so that we can verify if you were present or not. Okay, so we have taken it manually. Yes, Sister Isma, we have taken it manually. Okay, and that's it. Thank you very much. Sorry for overrunning by a minute. Wish you guys a great weekend. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And Jazakallah khairan, Brother Umaru, and all of you.
Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.